Every day we get information from TV, from newspaper, from friends, and of course from social media. What if I told you that there are ways to differentiate misinformation, disinformation, fake news from real news? Hi, I'm Manfred Stapff. Welcome to the real-world evidence perspective, bringing you truth, data, and candid context. So what is real-world evidence? So today we will look a little bit behind the background and the definitions of real-world evidence. The terminology comes from medical research, often used in drug development or also in research for medical guidelines. And we have to look behind the word to understand what is real-world evidence and what it is not. Real-world sounds obvious, sounds clear, but what does it mean in this context actually? Real world is everything which comes outside an experimental situation. Everything which happens in daily life, everything what happens in medical practice, the interactions, the examinations between doctors and patients, everything which is not influenced by any kind of research protocol, research experiments, scientific stuff, the actual real world of daily life. It's interesting that the definition basically uses the definition what it is not and not what it actually is. So it's not experimental. It's not a clinical study. The second word is evidence. So evidence can only be created when we have reliable data. So we have to first look at the data. It's important that data are of good quality. Obviously, no decimal point errors, no missing data, and all these kind of things which we have learned when we collect numbers or data or statistics. They have to be complete. The analysis has to be done according to appropriate statistical methods. The analysis then needs to be interpreted within the correct context. Going back to the original question, very often there is a hypothesis for a study and then there are completely different results, and they can only be interpreted if they are connected to the original hypothesis. You cannot just do a study and find something and then take it as an evidence if it was not originally phrased in a hypothesis. One calls this difference confirmatory statistics, when it confirms the original hypothesis which you made before you did the experiment, and descriptive or hypothesis generating statistics or hypothesis generating data. When you find something unexpectedly, then you cannot really take this as evidence, as proof, but you can take it as a basis to do another experiment with this newly discovered hypothesis. And then finally, extremely important, real-world data and real-world evidence need to communicate it in a proper way, adjusted to the audience, to the understanding of the audience. Not always as if you were talking to a group of Harvard professors. Also the audience may be different. Evidence can be weak and evidence can be strong. But there's a lot of gray area in between. Evidence can come in several stages, from very strong hard evidence to basically doesn't prove anything. There are 7 stages of evidence or 7 stages of knowledge gain. So it starts with some kind of story, a source. Someone tells something, someone posts something on social media. It's for the time being just an information. And then rumors spread out if other people take this and multiply it or forward it or like it or tell it someone else, then that's rumors. It's still not really proven, but the fact that other people tell that and take it is a slight indicator that there may be something behind it. And this something behind it has to grow in a reasonable scientific hypothesis. There must be a good explanation for what has been observed. If someone, for example, gets sick a few weeks after a vaccination, this may be just a coincidence. And one would ask, what could be the mechanism of action? What could have happened which makes this person sick? These observations then have to be properly scientifically described, ideally published in a peer-reviewed scientific magazine, scientific journal, and one calls this casuistic or several casuistics. The next step then, it's getting serious. Then we have to do a scientific experiment. The scientific experiment, the clinical trial, the clinical study should test this hypothesis and this event or the observation within a properly designed experimental scientific study. One can also have a targeted registry, a targeted poll or questionnaire distributed correctly to find out what have patient experienced, what kind of symptoms are developing in a specific disease. This is a semi-scientific, semi-real-world situation. And talking about real world, this is stage number 7. Every hypothesis, every scientific experiment result has to prove eventually that these results are also applicable to the real world situation, to daily life, to the real medical practice. Evidence always needs the proper context. So, for example, you find a bullet from a pistol or from a gun, and it depends on the context, where and how did you find it. If it was in an area where there was a shooting overnight, or you heard something suspicious, or the police has defined it as a crime scene, then of course it has a very important evidential value for this case. If you find the bullet just in the garbage can somewhere, then it's very remotely from any kind of crime. Then the value of this evidence in that context is a different one. Or another example, in medicine, we all know nitroglyceride as a therapy for angina pectoris against coronary heart disease. Nitroglyceride also can be used as an explosive. So if you find nitroglyceride chemically, then it depends on the context, whether it's for medical use or for a terror attack. So evidence always needs to be seen in the proper context. Evidence obviously has also its limits. Science is never 100% correct. Science changes. Science finds new results. What was 200 years ago, one opinion about science, can 200 years later be totally changed. Werner Heisenberg has phrased this already more than 100 years ago as his theory of uncertainty. So specifically, he said, it's not possible to exactly pinpoint the location of an object and the speed how it moves. Because either you know exactly the location, but then it does not move and you cannot measure the speed. Or you can measure the speed, but because it moves, you do not know exactly at the same time the exact location. Science always has its limit. You may remember in the beginning of the COVID pandemic when we did not know a lot about COVID. So the scientific results, the scientific knowledge, what was communicated by scientists changed a lot because people were learning, and that's absolutely normal. You perhaps remember the discussion about the masks. Masks work, masks don't work. So in the controlled experiment, one found out that masks, especially N95 masks, block the bacteria and the viruses very well. But in the real world, especially when a mask mandate was issued, one found from real world data that those areas, those villages, cities, states where there was a mask mandate did not do better in terms of infections and COVID incidence and COVID outcome than countries or states or locations where there was no mask mandate. And this is one of the classical examples of controlled experiment versus real world. Why did masks not work in real world with a mask mandate? If you force people to do something, you create a little bit of resistance. Some people had the masks like this. Some people had the masks like this or like this. Other people, even if they had it correctly, they thought, oh, I have my mask. I'm absolutely safe. I'm really protected. And they forgot or intentionally don't do other precaution measures like washing the hands, social distances. They become a little bit careless. So overall, the infection rate was the same in a mask mandate state or in a non-mask mandate state in real world. But the communication, of course, was confusing. Mask works, mask don't work. So people got a little bit confused, and people also lost trust into science. So what's better? Is the experiment better, or is real-world data better? There's no winner. Real-world evidence complements the controlled experiment. Real-world evidence will confirm the results in a controlled experiment. The results don't have to be the same. They just should go into the same direction because the methods are different. You cannot exactly expect the same results, the same data, the same difference between treatment A and B, but it should be a confirmation of the experimental situation in general terms in the correct direction. Let's look at an example in medicine. Many of you know the so-called GLP-1 agonists, the Ozempics or Mounjaros of this world. Started as diabetes drug, but then it was realized that it also helps losing weight. So can be used for obesity. And then there was the question, does this really do cardiovascular benefit? So they did a study, so-called SELECT study, on 17,000 patients over 4 years. Quite a big enterprise. And they found after 4 years that indeed the GLP-1 agonist patients did 17%, no, it is 19% better than the placebo patients. So there was a reduction from 8% in the placebo group, heart attack, stroke, etc., to 6.5% in the group with the GLP-1 agonist. In relative terms, it sounds impressive. 19% risk reduction to experience heart attack, stroke, and other cardiovascular events. In absolute numbers, one should recalculate that into the so-called number needed to treat, because the event rate is so low anyway. So who actually benefits from that by taking the drug? We will have another episode about statistics specifically and talk a little bit more about the number needed to treat. Just here, since we have mentioned it, the difference between 8% and 8.5% event rate gives a number needed to treat of 67, meaning 67 people have to take the drug so that one person benefits from it. The other 66 take the drug more or less useless. This is very important when one looks at such data. If it's communicated, 19% risk reduction, sounds good. But if you hear that 67 people have to take it and only one person benefits from it, gives you a different perspective. So how does this look in real world? The first thing what I showed was experimental clinical studies. Experimental clinical study have a study protocol, have inclusion and exclusion criteria. The population is not really representative to the population who actually takes the drug in real world. The doctor's visit are different. The kind of preferential treatment in a clinical study may have effects. One calls this Hawthorne effect. People behave differently when they know that they are observed. There's a placebo effect. All this is in a clinical experiment. In the real world, it's just like every day when you go to the doctor, I go to the doctor, absolutely without any scientific influence. So there are real-world data for this topic, and they analyzed real-world data in form of the insurance claims. If someone fills a prescription for a GLP-1 agonist. And what they found out was striking. After half a year, only 46% of the patients stayed with the medication. After 1 year, only 30% stayed with the medication. So there is no way that a significant number of patients could reach this 4-year-long treatment where this 19% risk reduction was observed. Most of them stop and are non-compliant much, much earlier. So the theoretical benefits of a 4-year study don't show up in a real-world study for the simple reason in this specific case, the patients don't even take it that long, which is sort of understandable. It's not really cheap. It's perhaps not always paid by the insurance. So this is a very important point to discuss when we look at the cost and benefit effect of such drugs, especially not only for patients or medical reasons, but also for the healthcare system. This savings, so to say, by preventing heart attacks and stroke, don't perhaps realize because patients don't even take it. So a few statistical points, as I said, will be covered in another episode. But I want to mention here 2 pitfalls because it's very important when we talk about real-world evidence and how to look at data at results, at news, at social media postings, or at cable TV news, who kind of try to convince you with statistics or with numbers. And they're all not professional, so they also misinterpret the numbers. The 2 most important misinterpretations or pitfalls are, number 1, the mix-up with statistical significance with clinical relevance. Statistical significance is the so-called p-value, less than 5%. It's just a statistical indicator which shows you whether this result is found by incident or it has a 95% likelihood to be actually true. And this is general agreement in science. This 95% is generally acceptable. But if you have a study with many patients, with thousands, tens of thousands of patients, then small differences between drug A and drug B can become statistically significant. Then the next question is this minor difference, is it even clinically relevant? If your blood glucose value increases by just 2 or 3 milligram, or your hemoglobin A1C value when you are diabetic goes down from 6.8 to 6.5, is this little difference really clinically relevant so that the doctor would change the therapy or the patient is on a higher or lower risk? This is the clinical relevance, very often not considered when people report about data and study results. The second thing is correlation versus causality. Whenever something happens, and two things happen sort of on the same time, two data changes at the same time, we cannot automatically assume that they are more than correlated, meaning that they have a causality, that one causes the other. If someone gets sick 4 weeks, 6 weeks after vaccination, it does not automatically mean that the causality is to the vaccination. I want to give you a little bit easier example. Here is a graph which shows the years 1970 to the years 1990. And you see the population in Germany, the human population in Germany, going down from 1970 to 1980. At the same time, also the population of storks went down. Then in the early 1980s to 1990, the population of storks recovered and went up. And at the same time, also the population of humans, of people in Germany went up. So that's a correlation. Can we now conclude causality and say that storks bring babies? If at all, then only in Germany, because there is no country with a similar correlation. It's just a coincidence. But what we usually do in such cases, we look for a common background variable. Is there something happening which has an influence on both of these data? Is there a kind of an environmental factor, socio-economic factor? Is there anything happening in Germany in the 1970s which had an impact on the stork population, but also had an impact on the human marriage rate, whatever birth rate? Is there something which impacted both? And the other way around, in the early 1980s, and this was all before the reunification, was there something in the society or in the economy or in the environment which had a positive and growing impact on the stork population, but also changed the human behavior in terms of marrying, getting kids, and this kind of decisions which couples have to make? So there is a common background factor. And since I'm talking about it, just this morning, I saw a study which told that younger people have more deadly accidents on the street as drivers than older people. And you would say, okay, the age is perhaps a causal factor. You are less experienced, so you don't pay attention. But who says so? If you are a beginning driver, perhaps you are more careful. So what they found out is that younger people have usually older cars. And the older cars have not all of these driver assistance systems. A warning in the mirror that there's a car on the side, a lane departure warning system, and all these kind of little helpers which help safe driving. So the common background variable was the age of the car and the equipment of the car, which caused more deadly accidents. And since the younger people had older cars that did not have too much money, they bought a pre-owned car, an older car. Since the younger people had the older cars, but the older people have more money, can afford a newer car. Overall, on population level, this caused the higher level of deadly accidents. So also an example about correlation and looking for a background variable. So finally, the last topic for today is an important one when we talk about healthcare data, about analyzing big data. That's the discussion about data privacy. And of course, we are sort of kind of paranoid about it. We get advertisings, we get spam calls. We wonder who else knows my telephone number and gives me cold calls and all these kind of things. The important thing to remember here is that the data protection laws in the consumer business are much lighter, much less strict than the data protection laws in the healthcare business. So as a consumer, you go to the supermarket, you have your supermarket membership card. This is connected to your email address, to your name, and each product which you buy gets scanned at the register. So they know exactly what an individual person is individually shopping, and they make their market research and they send you targeted advertising. That's why in the consumer business, it's legal, it's allowed, because when you had your membership card or you downloaded the app into your smartphone, you just clicked and basically gave your consent. It's not that easy in the healthcare area. When it is about healthcare data, and they are very well defined what it is, if it's about healthcare data, you have to actively, by written signature, opt in to the use of your data. So it's much stricter. Also, the protection of the data is much stricter regulated in the healthcare. And this has a good reason. In the consumer business, the companies are interested in your individual behavior as a person because they want to send you targeted advertising. In the medical research, in drug development studies, in the overall scientific medical research, this research is not interested in individual patients. This research is interested in how are populations doing. Populations with the same diagnosis, population who take the same drug, populations of a certain age group. And therefore, they take these data anonymized and aggregated and work with average or standard deviation figures or other statistical figures, but they are not really interested in the individual person. Similar like when you look at Google Maps and the traffic, it shows you where the traffic in general is moving. It doesn't show you one individual car. So this is very important. So data protection in healthcare is important, but it's so strictly regulated that one does not really have a good reason for big concerns. In my newest book, I have some sentences which I want to bring you here today. One is evidence-based science is what separates effective medicine from witchcraft. And I have another sentence which perhaps is a little bit more important for politicians. Evidence-based science is what separates and differentiates fair, well-designed legislation from power-hungry tyranny. So decisions and laws should be based on facts, on results in science, should be fact-based. Since I talked about the book, here is real-world evidence unveiled, Navigating the Maze of Modern Misinformation. You find it on Amazon as ebook, as paperback, as hardcover. And it summarizes a lot of these things what you have heard today, but also gives you much, much more what to do, how to identify fake news, misinformation, disinformation, how to make decisions based on good information, and much, much more. It's important to be informed, smart, and educated. The real danger to democracy perhaps does not come from politicians or from Washington or from one person in the government. A real danger to democracy is when we as citizens are not alert, are not educated, and do not know how to fact-check information which we are bombarded with every day. Thank you for watching the real-world evidence perspective, which brings you truth, data, and candid context. Don't forget to forward, like, comment, or subscribe to the channel, whatever you feel comfortable. Thank you very much.